and I knew, have you ever just sit down with somebody and knew that it was going to start a relationship? It was stimulated the intellectual conversation that we had. And I just began to talk to my brother, and I seen that he cared about people in general. And so I cared about people. So we just clicked. And so I just want to say some of his credentials: he's a doctor of psychology. He's a licensed clinical psychologist. He's a certified school psychologist. We can go on and on, but we don't want to go on too much and bore you with that, because we know he's educated. And it's good to have a young brother that is educated in the house and is able to come and speak to us and talk to us about some things that we need in this season. Amen. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to my brother, Dr. Johnson. Give him a warm round of applause.
I don't know about young anymore, but I'll take that. I'll take that. How's everybody doing tonight? It is such a pleasure for me to be here today with you guys and tonight and just have this discussion. I'm grateful and just privileged to have this opportunity to be with you guys and talk about something that I'm passionate about as it relates to mental health, and not only just mental health in general, but how mental health impacts our community. I'll be here for the next couple Wednesdays, and one of the things that I want to do, that I hope and pray that comes out of this is I can make connections with some of you all, and I can help some of you all as it relates to you may not be struggling with issues of mental health, but you may know someone. You may have a relative, a friend, someone close to you, and I can provide you with some information and guidance that you could help that individual. So I don't want to make this just me talking to you guys for roughly 45 minutes. So please, please, please ask questions. Raise your hand. I want to make this as interactive as possible. I want to learn from you guys, and I hope you guys can take something from me tonight. So tonight will be just a start, like I said, of a 3-part series. What I want to do tonight is to provide a broad overview of mental health. I have a couple videos that I want to show you. And again, I want to make this as interactional as possible. So again, stop me if you have a question, concern, comment, or just need more clarification. Go to the next slide. So usually when I start off presentations like this and being in front of a new crowd, although I've been to Restored Life several times in attendance to service, but I don't know most of you, but I know some of you and maybe 1 or 2 people very well. I like to just provide a little background about my experience and where I came from. So it hopefully guides you and understand where I'm coming from as it relates to this discussion on mental health. Anybody know what that backdrop is? Anybody can? Not Columbus, a little further north. Somebody's, no, not Cincinnati. What's that? Who? And Whacktown. No, not Whacktown. What did you say? Detroit. Yes, Detroit, Michigan. I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I call Detroit my home. My mom still lives there. My brothers, most of my family. So Detroit is near and dear to me because born and bred, a lot of pride about my city. I think it gets a negative rap sometimes, but that's just who I am. So I provide that as sort of a backdrop or context to where I'm coming from tonight. You can go to the next slide. Servant Jay talked a little bit about my credentials, my training. I started off college at Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. I went there for not even a semester, and I got real homesick. So I wanted to go get closer to Detroit, which Kentucky, thinking about it, didn't make sense now. But at that time, it's like, at least I knew a lot of guys from Detroit that I either went to school with or just knew. They went to Kentucky State, so I transferred there and got my bachelor's degree from Kentucky State University. From there, wanted to go into psychology. My mom's a clinical licensed psychologist. So I moved out east, always wanted to live out east. So I went to Baltimore and got my master's degree in applied psychology. And then finished up at JMU, James Madison University, where I got my doctorate in clinical school psychology. And I think I saw somebody with a Kappa Alpha Psi hat on. I'm a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Yo, go next. So, like I told you, most of my trainings in school psychology and clinical psychology. I show this slide because I think it's kind of funny. You guys may not find it as funny. Teacher says, how the diagnostics go today? Psychologist is pretty rough. Lots and lots of cases. Yep. 2 cases of ADHD, ADD, autism, Asperger's, and 1 paranoid schizophrenic. Wow, that's a lot of students. Students, I am talking about the staff. We got a lot of work to do. I will tell you, in my job, usually it's the adults that I find myself stressing out about a little bit and doing some of that work. But no, I love what I do. I've worked in Springfield City Schools since I completed my doctoral training, and kind of my role has switched. I started out as a school psychologist, and I won't, bury down and get in the weeds with that, but then transitioned to a more administrative role where I don't do as much direct service, but I still work with a lot of students, families, and teachers and staff. So my pride and joys, that is, I want to say, and Bobby, my mother-in-law, who's in the back, how long ago was that trip? That was like 3 or 4 years ago. Went to something along those, and we went to Niagara Falls. Now, I should have a newer picture of them, but I just love that picture with the rainbow in the background. But based on where I'm from, what would you say I don't like about the picture? Anybody pick it out? Yeah, that Ohio State shirt. My wife put that Ohio State shirt on my baby, man. So no, that was a great trip, fun trip with myself, my wife, my kids, and my mother-in-law. We had a blast. Next slide. But I'll tell you, my pride and joy is right there. Next slide. I can keep showing slide after slide of her because she has me wrapped around her finger. One more slide. This is our most recent trip. We were in Florida, and she and I got in a paddle boat. And I tell you, she is supposed to have a father-daughter day coming up, date Friday. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, so this evening's agenda. I'm going to start off with a little quiz. Just kind of get us to have some discussion about mental health, have some questions about facts and myths related to mental health. Then I'll give you guys sort of an overview. Again, I don't want to just talk at you. So again, stop me and ask questions. Let's make this as interactive as possible. I want to talk about mental illness. I chose anxiety to depression just to kind of give you guys sort of a broad overview of those 2 diagnoses because those are probably the most prevalent diagnoses as it relates to adult mental health functioning, anxiety and depression. And then I want to talk a little bit about the prevalence of mental health in the African American community and some things that are sort of barriers to accessing mental health for a lot of our communities. So before we get started, again, we have a nice sized group, but a small enough group that I can just make a couple points. Let's keep this a safe space and share. So again, I hope you guys feel comfortable. I know Servant Jay has created a space in this congregation where you guys can interact with each other and talk about things that may be personal to you. Be mindful of your responses and what they convey. Be mindful of your body language. Sometimes we can't see facial expressions with the mask, but just be mindful of what you're conveying when others are talking. Try to participate as much as you can. Again, you're not forced to talk tonight, but as much as you can be engaged in this conversation, it'll make it a more fruitful experience for everybody. Find strengths in our differences and be mindful of the time if you do share, because others may want to share as well. Go to the next slide. All right, let's start off with a quiz. And I brought chocolate, but if you don't want chocolate, if you answer a question correctly, that's all right. I'm not taking it home, so I will leave it here for somebody. All right, poor mental health increases the risk for long-lasting chronic physical conditions like heart disease, stroke, cancer, or all of the above. Anyone raise their hand and take a shot at that one? All right. What's your name? Serena.
All of the above.
All of the above. Let's give Serena a round of applause. Good job, Serena. You want to crack it open and get some chocolate? Go ahead. You take the first bit. All right. You can go to the next slide. Oh, go back. Go ahead. There you go. So yes, the answer is D. Poor mental health increases the risk for lifelong health conditions. Anybody ever heard of ACEs? ACEs study? I know Crystal probably has. Anybody ever heard of that? So again, a long story, not as long. There was a study that was conducted some time ago, and actually they it actually was an accident how they got involved in some of the information that came out of this study. Essentially, it showed that kids who had adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, at sort of a young age, the more ACEs they had, like maybe a parent in prison, a family member who abused drugs, being exposed to poverty and neglect, the more ACEs they had on the study, there was a correlation to health conditions, chronic health conditions in the future, like smoking, drug abuse, and some of the conditions that you see here, like heart disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes. So just think about that. That's, controlling for everything else. And this was like 17,000 people, predominantly white middle class. And they showed that if they reported having ACEs, or these adverse childhood experiences when they were young, there was a strong correlation between physical health conditions, chronic physical health conditions in the future.
You said about people like seeing their parents choosing something, but then also losing a parent.
Yes, yep. So just losing a parent in general. So I just highlighted having them in prison, but yeah, it could have been the death of the parent as well. Yep, good point. Or you can go to the next one. All right. Mental illnesses are very common, not very common, or fairly common. Somebody want to take a, all right, what's your name? Trinity, what do you say? Close, Trinity, but not, and you can still get some chocolate if you want some. Go ahead, Trinity. I appreciate the effort. I always reward effort. Anybody else? So it's not A. It's no. Actually, I was looking at it wrong, Trinity. You are right, sir. Yeah, you're right, man. My bad, Trinity. my bad. Let's get. Yeah, I don't get any chocolate. My bad. No, you go to the next slide. Yes, very common. 1 in 5 American adults and 1 in 5 children will experience a mental illness at some point in their lives. Just think about that. We roughly have, let's just say, 40 people in here. Just think about 8 out of 40, if I'm doing my math correctly, will experience some type of mental illness or mental health condition in their lives. Those numbers are striking. All right. Next one. Suicide is the blank leading cause of death among people ages 15 to 34 in the United States. Might want to take a stab on that one? I'm going to take a stab. What's your name? Yep. Oh, Jennifer. Which one? This B? D, yes, it is the second. Can you imagine that? Thank you, Jennifer. Let's give Jennifer a run. The second leading cause of death for individuals between the ages of 15 and 34. Next week, we'll get into more about depression, anxiety, and suicide, and things that you guys could do as individuals and as a collective group to kind of intervene for people who are experiencing some of those symptoms. Again, I don't know about you, but those numbers are startling. 15 to 34. That's a large group. The second leading cause of death. Go to the next one. Mental illness cannot be treated or can be treated. Somebody want to take that one? Somebody say B. What's your name? Say it one more time. Adriana, what do you say? B is correct. Let's give her a problem. Mental illness can be treated. Research shows that people with mental illness can get better and many recover completely. Again, if you don't take anything from tonight, take that. Like if you know someone who is struggling with mental health issues, mental illness, with the proper treatment that meets them where they are and gives them what they need, oftentimes people can recover from severe mental illness. Go to the next slide. Mental health is more than the absence of mental disorders, only important for some people, an important part of overall health and well-being. C is correct. I know who you are. An important part of overall health and well-being. Mental health is an important part of our overall well-being. Sometimes, and again, I don't know how you guys feel. Go ahead. Go ahead, shoot. I'm sorry. So there are research studies that shows that mental illness, particularly you think about depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, can be hereditary. Yes. So that doesn't mean it's always the case. But what I often see in my clinical practice is, say you have a parent, mom, dad, primary caregiver, maybe someone else, who is depressed, more often than not. How do you think their parenting is going to be for the child or children if they are struggling with mental health and depression? Let's just say poor, let's just say inconsistent, and you think about that parent-child relationship. That's one of the most important interactions in our lives when we are first born. Again, I won't bog you down with everything as it relates to attachment, but oftentimes what I see is if I see parents who have chronic mental health conditions, oftentimes they struggle to parent their children in a way that's going to be supportive. So it is hereditary. There's been research that shows that, but there's also that relationship piece. You think about that as it relates to parents and their children. Great question. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. If you know someone with poor mental health, you can help by reaching out and letting them know help is available, helping them access mental health services, learning and sharing facts about mental health, especially if you hear something that isn't true, or D, all of the above. What's your name? You said D?
That's her name.
Our name's Beautiful? Oh, I'm sorry. Beautiful. And D, all of the above. Let's give Beautiful a round of applause. Great answer. Again, I don't want to steal the thunder from next week's presentation, but we all can be tools and vessels for those individuals who we know may be struggling with mental health. And again, you can do it in a number of different ways. You know, I work closely with Crystal, and in the schools, I mean, we see a lot of students who struggle with mental health issues. You know, Crystal has probably some mental health background just for sheer experience and working in different school settings. But I know she's often like, Doc, I need you to come see this student. I mean, can you come to this building and check on this kid? I got this one kid who's near and dear to me. He's struggling. Can you go to? So just her making that connection and then allowing me to go to make a connection to see if I can support. All you guys can do that again. So just remember that, you know, you guys can be the agents of change for individuals who struggle with mental health. Go to the next slide. People with mental illnesses are violent. True or false? Everybody gets chocolate on that one. False. It's pretty easy. We'll go ahead. According to the Center of Disease Control, the CDC, a vast majority of people with mental illnesses are not likely to be violent. Actually, they're more likely to be the victims of violent crime. You know, again, one of those myths and misperceptions that we have about individuals who may struggle with mental health disorders. Next slide. Half of all mental illnesses occur before a person turns blank years old, and 3/4 of mental illness begins before the age of 24. Somebody want to take a shot at that one? It's kind of a tricky one. Go ahead, take a shot. C, close. Closer. Hey. Yes. I appreciate the effort. A, just think about that. Half of all mental illness occurs before the age of 14. And 3/4 before the age of 24. Again, in our positions as school employees, we see it on a day-to-day basis. Shoot, I have a son who's been diagnosed with ADHD and struggles with attention, concentration, and just his impulsivity. And he's not 14. He'll be 13 in November. Serious mental illness costs America how much in lost earnings per year? Think about that. How much do you think in lost earnings? It's a big number. I'll give you a hint. It's a big number. Not the biggest number. Anybody want to? So it's not the biggest one, but it's the second biggest. A, $193.2 billion in lost earnings because of issues with mental health. Let me go to the next one. Last question. Mental illness is caused by personal weakness, lack of willpower, a number of factors, including biological factors, stressful or traumatic events, and long-lasting, yes, C. Again, I really want to unpack that tonight, too. I think oftentimes, you know, I've had colleagues who talked about some of the kids that I serve, said, oh, they just need to get their stuff together. They know how to do right, you know, or ain't nothing really wrong with them. And again, I'm not saying that that's the case. That's not the case for some of the kids that I work with, for some of the young adults that I work with. But oftentimes, it's really a number of different factors. We talked about heredity. We talked about just adverse childhood experiences. We talked about chronic health conditions, and then a combination. Some people struggle with a combination of all three that contribute to mental health issues. Any questions before we move forward? Any comments? Oh, keep it. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, we're streaming. Okay, my bad. Go ahead. Another question. Any? So before I answer, anybody have any thoughts on that? Why the numbers are so high for our young people? Go ahead. So I'm glad that you say that. I'm right now involved in some research through Wittenberg and the Mental Health Recovery Board. We had the opportunity to interview, I want to say, students at all of our middle schools and at the School of Innovation. And one of the questions we asked them is, according to previous research, young people identify depression and anxiety as their number one health issue. So when we sat down with these groups of people, we did focus groups, these groups of young people who are amazing. Some of the best work that I've done since I've been in Springfield. They said social media. I mean, they talked about bullying. They talked about expectations related to school. They talked about home expectations, home life. But social media came back over and over and over again. And listen, kids can't stay off of it. That's the ironic part of it. They're talking about, man, social media causes us so much stress and anxiety. But I gotta have my phone next to me when I go to sleep, or I'm on TikTok when I should be sleeping and get ready for school. Shoot, sometimes I'm on TikTok, to be honest. So I get it, I'm not here to stand in judgment or cast any aspersions related to the young people's experience, but it is a different time when I grew up. It's just different. I mean, some of the things that are, if I can kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, that's going on at the high school right now. I mean, it's just like, man, what? I mean, I know we had issues when I was growing up, and that's not like I grew up way back, in time. But I mean, it's just a different day, and they have a lot more stressors that are in front of them now. Go ahead. Yes. Right. You're still in my thunder for the rest of my presentation, but I'm gonna get to that at the very end. We talk about what are some of the barriers of accessing services, and stigma is a big one in our community. Man, over the past couple of years, I've gotten an opportunity to meet Servant Jay and just get to know him. I'm sure he's a great vessel of support for many of you guys, his congregation. And I know in the African American community, we oftentimes use church and access church as a source of support and strength. And listen, sometimes I think it's go get connected to trained mental health professionals who can provide very intentional support, and so that's a good point. But a lot of times we don't want to do that. Any other questions or comments before we move forward? All good, all good. Thank you. Let's keep having this dialogue. Where am I on time? Good. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Mental health involves effective functioning in daily activities, healthy relationships, ability to adapt to change, and cope with adversity. On the other hand, mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotions, thinking, and behavior, or a combination of the three. Mental illnesses are associated with distress and different areas of functioning. I put up this graphic because oftentimes I use it to help young people and older people understand the impact of our thoughts, the way we think, how that impacts how we feel, our emotions, and then subsequently how it impacts our behavior. Just think of something where I was trying to think of an example driving over, but something I had a negative thought about. I'll just use a lighthearted one. I talked about being a Michigan fan, and I struggle thinking that we are going to ever beat Ohio State again. So with that, I don't feel too good about that. And then it probably, my behavior's affected, like all my family and friends who are Buckeye fans. I don't even want to be around them. I don't even want to watch the games. Again, that's a very lighthearted example, but the point is, you just need to recognize. So some of the things that I talk to kids about is like, man, you got to change your thought processes. I mean, you know, because that's going to change how you feel and then how you behave. It's all connected. Next slide. So in a given year, nearly 1 in 5, we talked about that, close to 20% of adults experience some form of mental illness. 1 in 24, roughly 4%, has a serious mental illness, and then 1 in 12, roughly 8.5%, has a diagnosable substance abuse disorder. And I won't get into that much tonight, but again, you want to talk about how maladaptive ways of trying to cope with some of the issues that we struggle with. And I see a lot of that starting at very young ages. We talked about this before. Mental illness is treatable. The vast majority of individuals with mental illness continue to function with daily lives. You know, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not going to say any names, but I work with a lot of people who struggle with mental health and go see therapists. And they're fully functioning adults. You know, so, you know, it's not that if you have a mental illness or a mental disorder, you won't be able to function and conduct your daily activities. And if you get the proper support, proper treatments, you can be. Go ahead, Krista. Thank you for sharing that, Crystal. And the thing I want to piggyback off what you said is the testimony piece and empowering individuals by sharing your story. You know, again, I talk about my past issues. I struggled with depression before in the past. And I talk about, you know, some of the issues I have with all 3 of my kids at different levels as it relates to, you know, some of the issues they struggle with. And again, I think it does for me, it does one thing. But again, to Crystal's point, that whole issue of just, you know, being your testimony and removing any stigma and empowering individuals to kind of seek out help or feel more comfortable talking about some issues that they may be experiencing. Many people who have mental illness do not want to talk about it, often related to shame or stigma. We've talked about that. And it's a medical condition, just like heart disease and diabetes. And again, I think that's part of the stigma. Again, that's at a sort of societal level. We see it as a sign of weakness, or we see it as it's not really, I mean, something you can just get over, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And individuals are really struggling out here, and particularly after coming out of this pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, not really coming out of it, you know, but people are really struggling with managing their mental health. And again, I tell you, I see it for my young people a lot now. I mean, things are, yeah, I'll just say that. I see it a lot. Mental illness does not discriminate and it can affect anyone regardless of your age, gender, income, social status. While mental illness can occur at any age, 3/4 of all mental illnesses begin by 24. We talked about that earlier. Mental illness takes many forms. Some are mild and only interfere in limited ways. Think about phobias. Anybody have any extreme fears of something? Just like, you know, maybe you want to throw it out? Ants and bugs. The ocean. Okay, ants, bugs in the ocean. Water. So here's the thing, like those are legitimate, and I don't want to minimize those, but that's not really going to affect you. Like if you don't ever come near ocean or water, you're good, you know. So I would consider that more of a mild form of a mental health issue. Again, not minimizing your experience, but other mental health conditions are so severe, people may need care in the hospital. I know individuals, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I know individuals who can't leave the house because their social anxiety is just so high. It's called agoraphobia. Like if you go out in the community, your anxiousness, your anxiety, everything associated with that is so high that you can't be in your own skin. You have to be in the house. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes. So when we talk about mental health, we want to talk about your overall well-being. So they can be interchangeable, and I want to catch myself when I'm doing that because I really want to make the distinction between addressing your mental health and what is mental illness, if that makes sense. Good question. Good question. Yeah, no, that's a perfect question. Short video right here, 2 minutes.
I want more compassion, in the next generation dealing with mental health, more love, more patience in understanding that mental health is everything. Right now, it's paramount to make mental health a priority. I mean, just look at the last year and a half we've been through. This is the moment for us to strive forward as humanity and be able to overcome the stigma around mental health.
I battled through the anxiety and the depression for about 3 years.
I would be fearful about things that I had no control over.
I've learned, various coping mechanisms to work on my mental health.
Throughout May, in recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month, we'll bring you stories of several players from around the league who share their struggles and triumphs with their own mental health and share different ways we as players and legends enhance and prioritize our own mental wellness.
For a long time, I was only focused on staying physically strong. Your brain is a muscle too, and it's something that you really have to practice.
I think one thing that I've realized for myself, for my own mental health, is to create and prioritize a support system. There are people that I go to pretty immediately if something feels off or wrong, and I'm quick to talk about it.
It means the world to me to see NFL players be so vulnerable with their struggles from a mental health standpoint. It was always the mightiest of the mighties, right? The manly men. The fact that it gets changing, the narrative is changing. When I first got into the National Football League, you would have never seen any pieces like this where guys are sharing some of this information. Now you're seeing guys raise their hand and say, hey, I'm willing to share my story because if my story can help somebody else out there, that's all that matters.
For me, that little public service announcement is so powerful because you think about, as Michael Robinson said, think about the NFL player, the most manliest of mans, just extreme masculinity, right? We don't talk about our weaknesses, but that is changing. And so to see the NFL sort of take that stance and promote destigmatizing mental health, I show it to a lot of my students because a lot of those kids aspire to be football players and basketball players and such. And, I encourage them to follow their dreams. But my point of emphasis is, don't dismiss any internal thoughts or feelings that you may have that may be contributing to some of the problems that you have, and seek out support if you feel inclined to do so and encouraged to do so. So anxiety is a normal reaction to stress and can be beneficial, right? Sometimes anxiety alerts us, to impending danger. So some stress, some anxiety is okay, actually can be beneficial if you experience it in certain situations. I grew up in Detroit, and certain areas of Detroit I just don't go to, particularly maybe at night by myself, because, some anxiety or internal feeling that I may have of just feeling unsafe. Again, with that, fear is an emotional response to an immediate threat. Anybody ever heard of that fight, flight, or freeze reaction? And that's biologically innate in us, right? Impending danger, sometimes people fight, to respond to that. Some people freeze and lock up. Some people flee. And again, either staying, fight or flight, or leaving to escape danger is a way of self-preservation. a way to keep ourselves safe in the midst of any fear we may be experiencing. What anxiety disorders are, so we're talking about anxiety, and then we move to anxiety disorders, like a disorder, our most common mental disorder, and nearly 30% of adults experience that. Anxiety disorder, can cause people to try to avoid situations that trigger or worsen their symptoms. I talked about the individual that I know that just won't leave their home because of the anxiety they experience being in social situations. In general, for a person to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, the fear or anxiety must be out of proportion to the situation or age inappropriate. I was coaching the AAU basketball team in Columbus my oldest son was playing on, and this one kid who we knew struggled with anxiety was playing. It was a really contentious game, and he asked the coach to come out, and he was an integral part of the team. So the coach turned to him like, "Are you ready to go back in?" And you could just see the fear on his face, and he was shaking. He said, "No, coach." I mean, his anxiety was so high at that point. In my opinion, it wasn't proportionate to the situation. I tell my boys, I get anxiety, I get butterflies when they play sports now. So, so that's some of that is natural. But if it stifles you and you can't perform sort of daily activities, that's when you start to look at it as being a disorder. Let's see where we are with time. This one's 5 minutes. I love this video, Kevin Love, but I don't. Let's watch. We won't watch the last one. Let's watch this one.
It's interesting when you have a injury, so to speak, and you have a knee injury or my hand or, it's an ankle sprain. It's a lot different when you can't see it and somebody doesn't know what's going on outside the lines. Everybody's going through something. Success is not immune to depression.
So Kevin, you are now the new face of mental health in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel?
At first, it was a little scary. I think from suffering with anxiety and depression for a long time into having my first panic attack on November 5th and not really knowing what that meant to fast forwarding being here now, it's changed my frame of mind. And I really do believe in writing my piece that everybody is going through something. So knowing that it doesn't discriminate and knowing that I'm trying to change the stigma, not only for, people in sports, but all over. I remember talking to my agent and he said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because a lot of people are going to talk about it." I said, "Jeff, I don't know if anybody will, but just understand I'm trying to help people." He goes, "I get it. If you help one person, if you help one kid, it could be absolutely life-changing and groundbreaking for that kid."
Let's talk about the panic attack for a minute, because that's when the world got a little glimpse of what was going on. So take us through what happened that night.
Well, it was very scary for me because I have always had the anxiety, and like a lot of people, and either it's like, for example, you want to go to bed or you want to go to sleep and you think I have a big game the next day. And so what happens? You plan your routine, you try to go to sleep, you get ready, and then you dig up the worst things that have happened the last 10 years for you. So I think it was a combination of things that were going on in my life that led up to that point, as well as it was a 5-7 start. And on November 5th, I just remember not quite feeling right. I remember we went through a few plays. There was a timeout. I got to the huddle, and that's when I felt something that I had never felt before. I couldn't catch my breath. I felt like my mind was completely out. And Ty Lue had said something to me. I told him I'll be right back. I ran in the locker room. I was essentially searching for something that I couldn't find. I didn't know this feeling. And then I just basically ran to our trainer's room, fell on the ground, collapsed, and my heart was jumping out of my chest, and I couldn't get air to my lungs, and essentially was trying to clear my throat, sticking my hand down my throat, trying to get myself
Seriously?
air. Yeah, so it was.
You must have been terrified.
It was terrifying. I thought I was having a heart attack. I really felt like I was going to die in this moment. I'm getting hot thinking about it. It was a moment that nobody wants to have, but it was very eye-opening. And then going to the hospital after that, everything checked out. And I was basically thinking to myself, well, what happened? I've now come to a point where I just kind of lay all my cards out on the table and say, this is what you get. And having that freedom of mind is something that I've never really had. It's actually given me peace. And sometimes things get worse in order to get better. Sometimes there is a rock bottom, but I know that, you know, people reaching out for help or talking to someone, it does really work. And for so long, I put that off thinking I didn't need it, because that was my playbook when I was young, is to suppress it and, you know, be a man. And, you know, I think the masculinity thing is you know, kind of misleading in a lot of ways, because when that's ingrained in your mind in the early age, you feel that way throughout. You know, I wish I would have had the presence of mind earlier on to face these things, but I think everybody has their moment, their aha moment, or that moment where, you know, they're able to come forward with these type of things.
So now I'm going to ask you what everyone wants to know. What's LeBron doing during this time?
Well, I remember the first thing he said to me after that came out was that, you know, he shook my hand on the back of the bus and, you know, kind of let everybody get off, and he said, you really helped a lot of people today. You helped a lot, not only a lot of kids, but you helped a lot of people. So that was a special moment, but, you know, I couldn't go a few minutes without another person in that community I talk about coming forward and saying, hey, this is my experience and I want to share this with you. So it was a way of seeing a lot of people are being vulnerable, and also, you know, sharing these experiences and having that community and saying we need to beat down this stigma together.
So stigma is still the problem. There's still plenty of guys that have issues, and they don't need to come forward to me or to you, but they do need to get the help. But there are players out there that think you're soft because you did this. They think DeMar's soft. They're going to think everybody that comes forward is soft. What do you say to them?
Like, it's such a tired statement. Like, I've put my time in this league. Guys put their time in this league. To be in the NBA, you're not soft. And to come forward with this, it's, like I said, that's tired. It's outdated. And it actually, in the end, is probably, for me, it was the best thing I did. And it's only going to help you moving forward. And it doesn't just mean basketball players or anywhere in sports. This is everyone and every human thing.
I mean, it's such a powerful video, at least from my perspective, of him to be as vulnerable and transparent and talk about his experience. Any thoughts about that video? Any comments, questions? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes. You heard you say it, right? Just one kid, right? If I can help one kid by sharing my experience, how powerful would that be? You had, you know. Yes. Yes. And again, here's my opinion, and somebody else may have another opinion to that. I think sometimes we've got to give ourselves grace, right? You know, and I think, you know, in certain situations, and then let's talk, just take sports. I've shown 2 sports videos, and I enjoy sports immensely. But, you know, but you talk about that pressure, and sometimes it is okay that you don't win. It's okay that you don't finish first. And, you know, if you can do that and relieve that pressure, maybe that does change how you feel. And then that could even be liberating, change how you perform. You know, again, I'll self-disclose, and my oldest struggles with that. He struggles with the pressure. Like, you know, just, I gotta be perfect. And if I'm not perfect at this instance, I'd rather not perform, which it affects his performance, you know? So I think that self-talk is important. And I think he's saying, giving yourself grace and allowing that, you know, we can remove pressures. And again, pressure can come from inside and outside, right? And it doesn't have to be just pressure you put on yourself in any situation, not just sports. It could be pressure that his dad puts on him. You know, it could be pressure that he experiences from his teammates, his coaches. You know, it can be a number of different things. And another thing I want to highlight from that video before we move on to depression is, I like the thought of just saying everybody's going through something. I tell all the teachers I can, like, listen, just assume that all of the students you serve and the families are going through something. It may not be something as catastrophic as losing a family member, but that doesn't mean that that's not, their experience is not catastrophic to them. So just under the assumption that, and again, I probably could pass this mic around and you guys could all talk about something that you struggle with in the past, something you're struggling with now, something that causing you some anxiety about some future. We all can, share our experiences, so I think if we all start from that level, I think it's important that, I think it'll just change how we interact with one another. I tell people, I try to give as much as I can my coworkers, colleagues grace. Just, think about what has happened to them as opposed to what's wrong to them. And that's, we're moving into more of trauma-informed care and just change how we just view each other. If I have lunch with Servant Jay and he may not be as expressive as he usually is, like, man, what's wrong with that dude today, man? That's not his, or I could say, man, what happened to him? What's going on with him right now that's contributing to that behavior? Yes. It's funny how that works, right? I know we can go to biblical verses, that talks about that, saying our worries and worries about things that we can't control. Again, I know we're getting close to time, so I'm gonna go through some of this a little quicker than I'd like, but I think you guys get the gist of tonight's talk. Depression is a common and serious medical illness. Depression causes feelings of sadness, a loss of interest in activities once enjoyed, and it can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and decrease a person's ability to function at home and at work. Go to the next one. I won't read off of all of these to you, but these are common symptoms of mild to severe depression. Think about trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, loss of energy or just increased fatigue, feelings of worthlessness or guilty, difficulty thinking, concentrating, and making decisions, or even the big one is when you start to have thoughts about death and self-harm. So I want to point out this slide because I think it's important in understanding depression and being able to make the distinction between depression and just normal sadness or grief, right? When disappointed, we usually feel sad. We suffer a loss and we grieve. Again, not to make too light of it, but when Michigan loses to Ohio State, I usually feel sad about that. But here's what I'll say, though. That's not clinical depression. Grief response, and I don't want to make light of this, when you lose someone you're close to, how grief affects you. And again, I tell people grief is not linear. Grief goes up, down, back. You may think that you're in a better place, and then you look up, something hits you, and then you find yourself emotional again. So again, I don't want to minimize that. But again, that's not per se, at least, depression. Now, again, grief, severe grief can lead to depression, but that's not depression in its pure sense. Depression tends to be heavy and constant, prolonged. There was a time where I was going through a bout of depression. I couldn't get off the couch. I was in college. I just couldn't get off the couch for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. I struggled. I was like, man, I just don't feel myself. I'm struggling right now. People who recover from depression often welcome the ability just to feel normal sadness. So it's not just this heavy load of like constant sadness, deep darkness. And to have a bad day as opposed to this heavy weight that's on their minds and their souls every single day. So is that clear for most people to make that distinction? Because sometimes I think that can, particularly as it relates to grief too. So lastly, I want to talk about mental health in the African-American community. Again, it's a lot on this slide. I don't like when I do slides like that. It's a lot of words, but let me just hit the highlights. According to the Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health, Black adults in the U.S. are more likely than white adults to report persistent symptoms of emotional distress and sadness. Black adults living below the poverty line are more than twice as likely to report serious psychological distress than those with more financial security. Here's the one that jumps out to me. Blacks and African Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide at all ages. But here's the kicker. Black and African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. And again, don't minimize the impact of suicide attempts have on that individual and the individuals that are close to that person. Next slide. Put this graphic up because I think it's a good depiction of, when we think about this issue of mental health, or as I'm using it interchangeably, mental illness in the African American community. 13.4% of the US population identifies as Black or African American. So you take that number, 16% of those reported having a mental illness in the past year. And I want to say this was from 2018. That's over 7 million people. So you think about that. That's more people than the population of Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia combined. So accessing services, only 1 in 3 Black adults who need mental health care receive it. Less than 33%, if I'm doing my math right. According to the American Psychiatric Association, African Americans, they're also less likely to receive guideline-consistent care, less frequently included in research, which is vitally important, and more likely to use emergency rooms or primary care rather than mental health specialists. So you can begin to see the disconnect there and how that could be an issue if individuals in our communities, surrounding communities, oftentimes who look like us, are not getting the appropriate care. They're getting inappropriate care in the form of emergency rooms and their primary care physicians. Not to minimize that, at least they're making an attempt to do something, but that's not sufficient. Let me go to the next slide. So again, looking at this slide, socioeconomic disparities in 2018, 11.5% of Black adults in the US had no form of health insurance. It says stigma, and that should be stigma. One study showed that 63% of Black people believe that mental health condition is a sign of personal weakness. As a result, you guys talked about the shame that's associated with it, and oftentimes not accessing the services because what we believe is attributed to some of the mental health issues, signs of personal weakness. Here's my thing, and I don't want to offend anybody, but everybody in this room could benefit from going to talk to somebody. Everybody. I don't care how strong you are, how on point you are, including me. Everybody can benefit from talking to a trained professional about what's going on with them. I'm not saying everybody in here don't say, oh, Dr. Johnson said everybody got a mental illness. No, that's not what Dr. Johnson is saying. I'm just saying the thought of going to seek out support from trained professionals and talk about daily life stressors can be beneficial. Yes, that would lead, thank you, Servant Jay, that would lead to more of how do you improve your overall mental well-being and mental health? Not that you have a mental illness. Go ahead, Crystal. Thank you. I'm back and I couldn't have said it better. And then lastly, on this slide, many people choose to seek support from faith-based community. In many Black communities, U.S., the church, mosque, and other faith institutions can play a central role as a meeting place and source of strength. And I don't want to minimize that either. I don't want to minimize the importance of Restored Life Ministries in that space of supporting individuals who may struggle and may not seek out mental health professionals. And then I could talk about systemic racism. I could talk, but I think part of that is this. Black people have historically been negatively affected by prejudice and discrimination in the healthcare system. So it's not just on the community. You got to look at sort of these larger systems that play a part in some of the issues as it relates to mental health in the Black community. And many Black people still have these negative experiences when they attempt to seek treatment. You know, and again, I think that's a discussion for another time, but we could spend another hour talking about some of those sort of systemic factors that go beyond just the individual seeking out treatment. We're not going to watch this video because we're close to the end, but essentially it's Taraji P. Henson, and she does a great job in the 7-minute video summarizing her experience with depression and anxiety and talking about the stigma and what changed for her as it relates to being able to seek out the support she needs. So again, this is my contact number, my office number. You know, I want to be a vessel within the community to support. You know, I work in the schools, but oftentimes a lot of my work happens outside of the schools as well. And again, I know we're running short on time, but it was my pleasure. And I appreciate you guys asking the questions, the comments. You know, it makes this, for me, a much more enjoyable, worthwhile experience, and I learn from you guys as well. So any questions before we depart? So yes, I am in private practice on a very limited basis, I will say, because I am super duper busy. But so next time when we come back together next week, one of the things I will have for you guys is a list of community resources that can be accessed. And if you need it before then, if you can't wait till next week, Servant Jay has my contact information, and I'll make sure I get that. That's the Community Health Foundation. Yep. If you need it now, 211. I'll bring a sort of a document that I use to give to parents and individuals to be able to access all the different agencies. But again, let me say this, it's not enough, but it is a start, and we do have supports within the community. What's your name? I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know Kelly and Jill well. I work with them over in mental health, and that is that and the Rocking Horse, I think, are one of the larger entities that service our community. But that was good information. Look at that. And even in the schools, what we do is we contract with mental health and other professionals, and we cover the cost oftentimes to kind of meet that need. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Go ahead. So that's you hit me with that question right at the end. No, but so listen, in all seriousness. So here's the thing, especially if it's an adult, it's going to end up being a personal choice. I mean, you can, make a recommendation, you can implore them based on your relationship with them to kind of, based on what you're seeing that may have changes that they're exhibiting and why they need to go see somebody, but that's not an easy answer. Because sometimes we've all heard people have to hit rock bottom to see that they need help. But, and I know that's sort of cliche, but it's actually, oftentimes very true. Sometimes people have to fall down, to really see it and really see the need for it. But again, using that relationship, close family members, friends, anything that you can do to kind of try to move that person that way. Now, if it's a child, that's another thing. That's, listen, you need to go to therapy, and we're going. I'm taking you there. But adults, it is more challenging. And that's not an easy experience. So I don't want to make light of it. Anything else? Go ahead. Here's what I'll say to that. So you don't know, but again, I think to Crystal's point, what she made earlier about, encouraging people to be preventative so you don't hit that. I mean, I think is probably the best thing that people can do. And I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think it has to be a personal choice, and you have to recognize that I'm not well. I need to get better. Again, so I use the cliche of hitting rock bottom. I don't know what that looks like for everybody, but I know people go through experiences, and and that may be part of the mental health issue. They don't recognize that they need the support, or they may not want to be honest with themselves and say, like, I need to get better. Again, I am just thankful that Servant J is providing a space for us to have some of these conversations, because I don't think we do it enough. So I want to reiterate that there's a lot of conversations going on in the community right now about this topic. So it was God sent that he reached out to me and said, listen, this is on my heart, this is on my spirit. We need to have these conversations in this space because it's vitally important. Anything else for the good before we go ahead? That's hard because that's when you start moving in, and again, personality disorders and like people who, just want to. I was having a conversation with somebody today who said, like, I don't want to get better because if I get better, then people will think that I'm okay and they won't care. I mean, she said this to me today, like, so I struggle with, I want to be sad. I want to be whatever the case may be, because that's been her experience all her life. People have cared that she was not mentally well. So to be mentally well, what does that look like? That doesn't even feel comfortable, because then people won't care about me anymore. So I won't say they often choose to be that way, because it could be truly a mental health, a chemical imbalance, something going on with them. But they do, when you think about that cognitive triad, they have these negative thoughts. It affects their emotions, and it affects their behavior. So it's all interrelated. So maybe it's not a conscious choice that I am like, and even with this lady I was talking to today, maybe it's truly not a conscious choice that I want to stay sick because people will care. But she behaves that way because she feels that way and she thinks that way. So she's telling me about a breakthrough she had in her therapy. And for her, it was like, man, I recognize that this is the case. But that's hard, though. That's hard. I mean, again, it's particularly with people who have severe mental health. I'm talking, and those are usually the people that you're referencing that, for whatever reason, they stay in that space. And again, I don't want to come in here and say like everybody who goes through therapy gets better, because that's not the case either. I learned something new. Pills and prayer. I like that. Pills and prayer. Go ahead. I think that's situational. You're saying if there's a husband who's having an issue or a wife who's having an issue, should they both be in that together? I think that's a personal situation. Here's what I will say, though. I think it's important. So, if Sherry and I, my wife, if I've got an issue, it may not be beneficial for Sherry to accompany me to therapy with that issue. It may be with Sherry. I may have the issue with her, and I need a space where I can kind of talk about it and work it out before we come together. And again, that's just one example. They may have a relational issue where at some point they do need to go into that therapist's office together and work through it as a couple. But I'm a firm believer of deal with you first, even though you're in this space with another person, deal with you and get better before you can try to work on, not before, maybe sort of at the same time when you're working on that relationship space. You guys have some good questions tonight. Good. I like it. Anything else? And again, I don't want you to minimize the importance of, and again, I'm gonna keep saying it, that Servant J provided this opportunity to have these conversations, and we have ongoing conversations about mental health and mental well-being and mental illness. So, listen, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me tonight.
Did you enjoy it tonight? It was just pressed upon my heart, and that's why I had to reach out to Dr. Johnson. And we're going to continue to do this while I'm here as pastor, because I just really believe that mental health is important. I think it's been neglected too long, and we're seeing some of the outcomes and when you neglect it in society right now. But when Dr. Johnson was speaking, a scripture came to mind, because I got to put scripture on everything. He was talking about your thought life. And God took me to Philippians 4:8. He said, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, what is commendable, if there be any excellence, if there be anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So we got to change our thought life. A lot of this stuff that we go through is our thought life. I'm not saying that you can't have chemical embarrassment. I'm just saying some of it is what we look at. We have negative thoughts about a lot of things. And the reason why, and I deal with a lot of stuff, y'all know as a pastor, the way I'm able to move forward, I'm just telling you how I deal with it. I try to find the positive in everything. In everything. I'm just a positive person. If I'm getting a car accident, I'm saying, you know what, at least I got the money to get it fixed. I'm trying to find the positive in everything, because you can always dwell in the negative. Amen. Let us stand to our feet and let's go home tonight.